Hello and welcome to part 3 of this mini tutorial series. Now yes, I know it's been a while. However, I do want to finish this up so I can then move on to other courses and tutorials. The reason why it's taken so long is because I have recently released a new service called blendertutorials.org. If you're just a beginner and learning Blender for the first time, I highly recommend it. It's got quizzes, it's got rewards, and it's just a fantastic environment to really get into the itty-grittiness of 3D. Okay, but now that that's out of the way, let's talk about finishing this scene up so that it actually looks pretty. In the last two episodes, we made a scene like this. We've got a boat that's traveling along our water that's being animated, and the boat is reacting to the waves, which is perfect. So now we're going to make it pretty. Now, we're not going to do anything too fancy here. Essentially, we're going to be applying a gradient map texture to our boat, and then we're also going to be creating a very simple ocean material for our use here. Okay, so now let's get to it. So let's start off with the boat itself. So I'm going to select the boat and I'm then going to go to UV editing up here. This is my UV editing workspace. Now I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. There we go. So I now want to create a material for this boat and we want to then start using the UV editor. Okay, so let's bring up the texture that we're actually going to be using for this. And here it is right here. So all that it is, very, very basic, is just 3 or 4 gradients actually. That's it, literally. Now we could make this much smaller. In fact, we could have these gradients taking up a much smaller surface area. The reason why this is a really, really good way to texture more low poly or simple things is because you can just use this as a palette. And we're essentially not going to deal with the itty grittiness of UV unwrapping. It's actually going to be very, very simple for those of you who are just starting out UV unwrapping. So, for example, all that I'm going to do here for the boat hull is I'm just going to select it. Now, if you want to select a part of a mesh that is separate from others, you could just hover over it. So for example, I'm in vertex select mode. So I'm going to hover near a vertex and I'm going to press L. Think L for linked. So when I do that, we'll see that my hull is selected. Now, I've actually already UV unwrapped this, but I'm going to do it again. So I'm hovering inside my 3D window now, and I'm going to press U for UV unwrap, and then I'm just going to unwrap like this. So this is what you would get normally if you try and unwrap. This isn't useful for us. We want a bit more control over it. And what we want to do is we want the shape of the ship to turn up on here so that we can then see the result of it. Okay, so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first put my viewpoint here into a side perspective, so on the x-axis. So one way I can do that is by pressing tilde key, and that's going to give me a submenu like this. I'll go left or right, doesn't really matter. Alternatively, we can press up here in our little gimbal. And then, of course, there is the numpad as well, so numpad 3. So now that I'm in this view, I can press U for UV unwrap, and instead of unwrap, I'm going to come down to where it says project from view bounds or project from view. Because we're going to be doing a lot of manipulation, it actually doesn't matter which one you use. So I'm going to decide to use project from view in this one. Okay, so I've now done that, and we should see that our UV unwrap is over here. I'm just going to move it into the UV area by just using G for grab. Okay, now that I've done that, let's set it up so we can actually see the image being applied here on the hull. To do that, I'm going to navigate to my material properties and I'm going to create a new material that I'm going to call ship. Now that I've created this new material, I want to head over to the shading workspace to hook up a few nodes. The node that I want to add to this principled ship shader is I'm going to add an image texture node. So I'm going to go to add, and then I'm going to go to texture, image texture. So now I'm going to just connect color to the base color by just clicking and dragging. And because I loaded up the texture into Blender beforehand, I can literally just go over here to the drop-down menu and load it up from here. Now, if you hadn't, you can press open, but in our case, I'm just going to load it up here. Okay, now you'll see that a lot of this is already done for us. Just to make sure that it's not, I'm going to press U, unwrap. Let's go back to UV editing and let's just grab all this and I'm just going to throw it over here. Okay, so it's all reset. Let's go to material preview now up here so we can see what we're doing. And I want to edit. I want this part here to be brown. So I'm going to hover over it, press L, just like before. And I'm going to go into my side view, U for unwrap. And then I'm going to do project from view. There it is there. I'm now going to move this projection into the brown. And I can be a little bit rough with it. I don't have to worry about constraints and sizes. So I'm going to press scale and then X to squish it down so it all fits in the brown area. Now we should see that the hull is now brown. In fact, everything is brown. But I want a bit of gradient. I want a bit of that lighter brown on the top of the deck here. I'm going to use S for scale, and then I'm going to constrain it to the Y axis by just clicking on Y. And now if I scale up, it's only going to move up and down, which is constrained to Y. Now if you look over here, when I do that, SY again, you should see that the top is getting lighter and the bottom is getting darker because the gradient goes from light to dark brown. Okay, so now that's looking really good. Let's add a bit of detail now. Let's do the sail next. So I'm going to go hover over, I'm going to click off by just double tapping A or just clicking anywhere on your screen. Hover and press L to grab it. Now, in this case here, we could still do it from the side here. It actually probably wouldn't matter. But to make it a little easier for us visually, I'm going to do it from the front of the ship. So I'm going to set my view to the front. I'm then going to press U and project from view. Let's do bounds this time to explain what that does. So before we were seeing that project from view, things were ending up over here. If I do project from view bounds, we'll see that it constrains the UV layout that it's created, that is generated to the bounds of the image. So now I can press S for scale, scale it down, and I'm going to move that with G into this sail color that I've got going on here. But again, I want a light at the top and I want dark beige at the bottom. So I'm going to press S, Y, and I'm going to stretch that up like so. Now being careful not to go into the bottom over here. So I'm going to press G for move, and there we go. So we should see that we start off with a dark beige and we go up to a light white. Okay, so all that's left now is just to rinse and repeat on all of the objects here. So for example, let's do the decking here. So I'm going to just hover over with L near a vertex because I'm in vertex select. And then I'm just going to do that for both of them like so. For this one, I'm just going to go from the side perspective, U, project from view bounds. Now that's where they are right now. I'm going to use my box select tool by clicking and dragging over these ones here, G, and I'm going to move them closer to the ones down here so they're all roughly together. I'm now going to press A for all to select everything in here, making sure that your cursor is in the workspace that you are working in when you call upon those shortcuts. Always remember that Blender's shortcuts are determined by what workspace your cursor is in, because that workspace is then active. You can actually tell when a workspace is active because the top bar up here will highlight. So making sure my cursor is in here, S for scale, scale down, and then I'll do S and then Y to thicken it up a little bit like so. Okay, so already we're seeing a big difference on this ship. It's already starting to look a little bit nicer. Now for these little rings here, I'm going to make them like a gold material. So when you're doing a gradient pattern like this with gold, what I find works really well is a orange, a very bright orange to white. And then what you can actually do is you can throw in slithers of the mesh into the white area, but we're not going to do that just yet. So I'm just going to make sure that everything is deselected in edit mode. I'm going to hover over one of them to begin with, L. I'll do the same for this one, L, 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 all the way up. There we go. So now if I press G, we should see that I've got them all. Let's hover over here, U for unwrap, project from view bounds, and now I'm just going to move them down into themselves, just so it's a little easier to work with. So just G and Y, that's all we're doing. So whatever axis you press after using a shortcut like G, R, or S, it's going to constrain it to that axis. Now you would think maybe Z because we're going up and down, but because UV is a two-dimensional workspace, it's X and Y instead. So X, Y, Z, Z being the last one, so that just gets kicked off. Okay, so I'm just going to scale this down on X so it's a bit thinner and it fits inside this area. SY, SY, just get a bit thicker. There we go. That's looking okay, but perhaps I think if we twist this and we go from the side, that might look a little nicer. Yeah, I'm digging that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to just maybe add a bit of red to this masking here. And we're just going to, again, hover over it. L, let's go from the side. U, project from view bounds. There it is. Hover in here. I'm going to use R for rotate this time. R for rotate, S for scale. I want it to be a bit red, like so. And I'm just going to move these structures around just so I have a little bit more control. Just using G, R, and S standing for grab, rotate, and scale. Perfect. Okay, so there's our very, very basic material for our boat setup. We could go a lot further into this, but I think for now it's okay if we didn't. In fact, one thing that I might do is I might make there's a little bit of this interesting, what would I almost call it? Like this little bit of a rim up here. We're just going to actually try and select that. Actually, we're not. Cancel that. Okay. So let's now talk about the ocean material. So it's actually very, very, very simple. Let's start off with just creating a new material. Let's actually go to our shading workspace before we do this. We're going to select our ocean, new material. Let's call it ocean. And now we're going to leave pretty much everything as default in here except for the roughness, which we want to push down. So think about when you sand something, it becomes more rough. So what's the opposite of rough? Smooth. And when something is smooth, it reflects light because of the parallel rays are being reflected parallel. Whereas something's rough, it goes in and scatters in lots of different directions. That's kind of like the lighting sort of logic as to why something is more shiny when it's less smooth, less rough, I should say. So water being pretty shiny, we can make it very not rough at all. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's make it a little bit blue. And I've actually already got the number here in hex. If you want to copy this down, I'm going to click in here, change this to hex, and I'm going to paste in 56A7E7. And that's going to give us this nice, very cartoony blue. So already, this is looking quite good, but we could take it that one step further. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add in a noise texture. To add a noise texture, we can go up here to add, or we can go Shift A and search for noise. Be careful not to get white noise though, because it's a very different node. I'm going to go down to noise texture, put it in, drop it, and now I'm going to take the factor of it and I want to put it through a bump node. So let's get that node in as well. Again, Shift A, search, bump, and I'll just drop it just after the noise texture. So now I can take the factor, put it into the height, and I can take the normal and put it into the normal. And what this is going to do, it's going to convert our noise texture into a vector information that can be read by the principled BSDF shader. So we should already see quite very, very nice sort of like an ocean effect. Now, again, this is a pretty simple effect. We're not going too insane with this. We could have cresting waves and things like that if we were to really utilize the ocean modifier to its fullest potential here. But that's not the point. The point is just to show you how to get these results quickly and to also show you a very nifty feature about nodes, which is you can animate the values in here over time. But we're getting to that in just a second. If I press play now, we're going to see that the noise stays pretty static on the on the actual surface of the water. Now, if you wanted to, we could change the noise texture to be 4D, the fourth dimension being time. So here is W. And as we increase W, we'll see that this changes, which is really cool. And we actually might use that in conjunction with the other technique that we're going to be using, which is utilizing a mapping node and then animating one of the directions of it to insinuate a movement of water. Think of it being like a choppy or windy day and the water's being pushed by the wind, at least the surface. So let's now add a texture coordinate node. And then we also want to add in a mapping node. So whenever you add a texture coordinate node, it's always a good bet to add a mapping node with it. You don't have to, but it does give you a lot more flexibility. And in our case, it's actually essential for the effect. So then we're going to take the generated and shove it into the top vector slot. We're then going to take the vector output and put it into the vector input of our noise texture. And we should see that not much changes. But if I then animate this Y value, you'll see that the noise starts to shift in this direction. So what we want to do is we want to animate this value so it moves. So I'm going to set that back to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get a timeline up here. I'm just going to split my window by clicking and dragging in the corner here. And then I'm going to change this to a timeline temporarily. And I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to right click on Y, insert keyframe. Let's make sure that it pops up. Sometimes it doesn't. I think what we need actually is a dope sheet. And I need to turn off show only to select it. And there we go. That's all good for now. There it is. So ocean, material, that I'm looking for the material icon, shader node tree. I'm going to go forward maybe to frame, let's say frame 60. And I want to set this to -3. And I'm pretty sure -3, let's just make sure. Yes, -3 is going the direction we want because I want the water to shift this way to insinuate the wind or perhaps movement of the boat here. So now that I've done that, we'll see that it's turned orange. Orange means, hey, you've changed this value, but you haven't set a keyframe yet. So if I was to then move this, I would lose that change. So orange is like a warning. It's like saying, hey, set me or lose me, essentially. So I'll do that one more time. I'm going to right click on it, insert a keyframe. I've got a keyframe now, so I should see that the water's moving between frames 1 and frame 60. Now you might be thinking, but why not just go to the end frame 80? Very good question, which I will get to in just a bit, just after we cover one final thing, which is notice how the movement starts very slow and ends very slow. That's because currently it's easing in and out, and we don't want that for this particular animation. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select the channels here for the Y default, like so. And then I'm going to press T for interpolate, linear. We should see a line going between them now, insinuating a line. And what this essentially means is that the change is constant. It is linear now. There's no easing. So this is really good if you want something to be constant. But as I said, once we reach frame 60, it ends. We don't want that. Now you might be asking, well, why didn't I just go to frame 80? And that's a fantastic question. The reason is because if you want your animation to be longer, you don't want to sometimes animate or change the duration of the difference of these two keyframes here. Because if you do that, you have to then retime it. You're going to have to change the values. It's going to be a mess. So instead, what we can do is we can use these two keyframes and extrapolate the curve from it to continue on the path. So it's going to continually animate after this point here. Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, it's actually really, really simple, and it's going to make a lot of sense once I show it to you. To do it, we're going to change this dope sheet from a dope sheet to a graph editor. So here's our graph. Now that green line here is a representation of the value changing in our location for our mapping node. Now what we want to do is we want to tell this line, hey, you're going on this course here. I want you to continue on that course into infinity. And it's very simple to do this. All that we're going to do is we're going to bring up the sidebar here in this viewport. We can go to View, and then we can go to Sidebar, or we can press the shortcut key N. We're going to head over to Modifiers, making sure that Y default value, so the value that we want to change is selected. It's orange. And then we're going to add a modifier. We're going to add a cycles modifier. Perfect. Now you'll see that currently it kind of goes back up and then starts again. We don't want that. We don't want that at all. So what we're going to tell it to do is after mode, so after it's finished playing, we're going to say repeat with offset. So now we should see that it will just go infinitely down into infinity. And if you want to actually do the same for before, you can actually say before mode, repeat with offset. Not that you need it usually, but that's a good little trick. So now it's just going to continue on. I could make my animation 200 frames and this will be constant throughout it. So you can really have a lot more control over the speed of this, because if I just change this one keyframe, it changes the slope, the speed of the entire value here, which is really, really useful for just cutting down a lot of the time and effort that would have been needed to change this animation at a later date. Okay, so that's looking really good. Now, I did say that we might use the time value of the noise texture to add a little bit extra here, and I think that's actually a good idea. So I'm going to head back over to frame 0, and I'm going to hover over W, right-click, insert keyframe. We can be a little bit guessy here. I'm going to go to frame 20, for example. I'm just going to change it maybe to like 1. Right-click, insert keyframe. Perfect. Let's make sure I've got my noise texture selected. There it is. And here is my curve. Now, I'm not liking that curve right now. Let's just untick that one there so I don't see it. There we go. So let's get that curve. T linear. Wonderful. So it's a straight line now. I'm then going to add modifier, cycles, repeat after mode. We want it to set to repeat with offset. There we go. So now it should be changing. Now it's changing a little bit fast for my liking, but not to worry. Because what we can do is we can just grab this, I want to call it a vertex. We're going to grab this point here, and we're just going to press G, Z, and we're just going to hold down Shift to make little minute movements, and we're going to drag it down. So it's going to change much slower now. And what we're seeing is a much more dynamic and ever-changing surface for this ocean. And we have a lot of control over this now as well. I can increase the scale, decrease the scale, and it looks much more interesting than if I just had this. So that doesn't look all that interesting. Let's go back to normal here. Oops, I need to turn time ocean back on so it actually works. Okay, so this is, it's passable. But this adds just a whole extra level. So now that we've done that, we've essentially done the texturing of both of these assets. They weren't very difficult. But if we were to go to rendered mode now, which is this one up here, this is the final output of our file. And we're noticing that it doesn't look all that crash hot at the moment. The reason for this is because the environment, which is currently set to gray, is contributing to the overall lighting of our scene. And this is where you see the term HDRI pop up a lot. What a HDRI is, it's an image that has an equirectangular projection. So what that means is it's able to project it to a sphere, and it basically contributes to the lighting of the scene. You will see it in movie sets, for example. There'll be someone that has a very shiny ball, one that has usually a shiny side and a matte side, and they'll take a picture of it. The reason they're doing this is so that they can then match CG elements later on to the lighting of the environment. Now, because we don't have the luxury of having a, what would I call, a environment built ready for us, I highly suggest heading over to HDRI Haven. In fact, I think it's called Polyhaven now, where they have free HDRIs. Very good resource if you just want a very quick HDRI to preview your work. So head over there. There'll be a link in the description below with that, and you'll be able to download a HDRI from there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab one that I've previously got for this particular work. So it's called Small Harbor 2K.hdr. And I'm going to come over here to my world property settings because this is where the environment settings are found. And here they are here. And I'm going to click in color. We could do this via nodes, but we'll just do it this way. I'm going to click in this color yellow circle, and I'm going to go to texture. Now, a lot of people, what they do is they do image texture, and that's just wrong for environments. You want to go environment texture. The reason is because it won't equirectangularly wrap, and I probably butchered that word. So now that I've done that, let's then open, and we'll drag our HDRI into it. And there it is. And as you can see, just by doing that one little thing, we've fundamentally changed the overall look and feel of this scene. Now, that doesn't mean you should rely all the time on HDRIs. Sometimes it's very important to do your own custom lighting, but this just adds that extra little bit of realism that might push it into a direction that can inspire you to do something else. So this is already fantastic and looking much better than before. Now, one thing I get asked a lot by my students is, well, how do I get rid of the HDRI if I don't want it to render with my final output? And that's a good question. If you hover over to render properties and you go down to film, you can turn on transparent, and this will ensure that you're rendering with a transparent background. So even though my HDRI is still technically contributing to the scene lighting, it is now invisible to the camera, which is very, very useful and will allow us to then composite at a later date a different background potentially. And this is how we go about creating a boat scene from scratch, very simply, for Blender. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll endeavor to get to all of them. Also, if you're just a beginner, I highly, highly suggest heading over to blendertutorials.org and signing up for a free trial of my new service. It is a paid subscription service, but I do feel it adds a lot of value to those of you who are just starting your learning in Blender. I don't think you've seen anything like it, and I'm continually evolving it, so more and more content is being added to it. If you have any suggestions for the website and you want to see something new, please feel free to let me know either on the website contact page or on YouTube directly, and I'll endeavor to get back to you. Okay, thank you so much for watching. It's been a pleasure as always. This is Hayden Fowles on blendertutorials.org.